Every day, traders and investors dive in to tackle the ever-changing markets to find opportunity. Futures Radio Show is your number one source for answers to the questions that all market participants want to ask. Veteran futures trader Anthony Crudele sits down with the most influential leaders and top traders in the industry. Now, here's your host, Anthony Crudele.
What's up, everybody? Anthony Crudele here, and thank you for tuning in for this episode with Christian Fromhertz. Futures Radio Show is sponsored by CME Group. They are the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world effectively manage risk. For access to free educational tools and resources for the active individual trader, please visit activetrader.cmegroup.com. Remember, everybody, new shows are posted on Mondays and Thursdays. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review on iTunes. This show is also sponsored by Trading Technologies, Footsie Russell, RJO Futures, and Top Step Trader. To learn more about some of the great offers that these sponsors have just for our listeners, please visit futuresradioshow.com/sponsors. Today I spoke with the CEO of Tribeca Trade Group, Christian Fromhertz. I have been following Christian on Twitter for some time, so it was really nice to learn more about him and his backstory. And since he is a stock and ETF trader, I thought it was very interesting to hear how he approaches his trading versus someone like myself and many of you that are futures traders. We talked about his entire process for trend trading and momentum. He explains how he uses options for confirmations, picks the markets he's going to be trading. He talks about some of his current positions and explains the reasons he is in them. And last but not least, we talked about mental and statistical edge for discretionary traders. So without further ado, let me take you right to the interview with Christian. So Christian, I've been following you on Twitter for some time. You put out a lot of great content. I'm excited to speak with you today. I don't know much about you and your backstory, so let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I started trading all the way back, out of college back in '98. I started as a financial advisor out of college. So I'm kind of dating myself here a little bit, but it's funny because we just, started to hear some brief comparisons to 1999 the other day, which
Yep.
I don't think we're even close to that, but that's right around where I started my career. So it was definitely an interesting time frame. From there, I was on the retail side and I moved over into institutional trading. I worked at Merrill Lynch for a long time. Merrill Lynch became Bank of America. So worked my way onto a trading desk on the institutional trading desk, which was known as a Delta One trading desk, where you basically trade a little bit of everything. And what I specialized in was ETF trading, also a lot of baskets, customized indices. So, I worked through that time frame from, basically 2005 to about 2014. I was an institutional trader. So saw a little bit of everything, saw things like, traded through the financial crisis. So really some much higher levels of volatility than we're experiencing now. Also traded through things like the flash crash. And so really, got a chance to kind of really live through a lot of different events. Probably the financial crisis being the most interesting. And then what I decided to do was kind of start my own business after that and work for myself. So I've been doing that for almost about 4 years, where I've started the Tribeca Trade Group. And it's a little bit, it's more hands-on. I'm managing my own money. And then I started a trading room where basically, I'm helping traders, consistently showing them, the major flow of the day, option activity. But what I really do on a day-to-day basis is just kind of mesh tape reading with technicals and, looking for breakouts and things like that, and really relative strength and momentum in the market.
Yeah, you put out a lot of charts. What markets are you trading?
A little bit of everything. I mean, I like to say, whatever's moving, right? So predominantly what I trade is equities and options, but I'll also trade, ETFs. If I really think a sector is moving, I'll trade the actual ETF. And also I like international markets, which comes and goes, right? I mean, we've been seeing international markets start to kind of pick up a little bit over the last few months, now that the trade war rhetoric is hopefully behind us for now. We've started to see emerging markets pick up. So if they're dormant and if they're not trending, then I kind of stay away for a little bit. But if they start to pick up, I'd love to trade international markets. It just has to be, just has to have some opportunity there.
What do you consider your style of trading?
I would say trend trader, and I would say momentum. So I kind of mesh a couple different things. There's definitely a lot of, there's a lot of things that really fits what I do in terms of personality with trend trading and sticking with the trend. I really have kind of, bought into that in terms of, no one really knows how long a trend will last. We've certainly seen, a number of stocks this year that have just continued to trend. So I definitely follow that and momentum. So I'm really looking for trying to find what groups of stocks are starting to get either a rotation into. So I use a couple different tools and a couple different indicators to kind of spot momentum and what the new trend is.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So trend trading and momentum is the style you would consider yourself as a trader. Talk to us about your strategy and take us to the very basics of it. How does everything work within your process?
So it's doing a lot of homework. It's, when the market is open, I already kind of have an idea of some of the things that I'm looking for. I'm just looking for new information, right? I know, option trading has become a really big thing the last couple of years in following option activity. I use it, a little bit different than most use it. I will basically just kind of look for ideas, right? So if I see something different on the tape, I kind of just, like a little bit of a vacuum. I just try to suck up as much information that I'm seeing on the tape and where some of the institutional players are putting some money. But, that's basically it for option activity. I'm not one of these guys who think, oh, well, they know something or, it's just really kind of an idea or a spark. So that's what I'm doing during the day. And then at night or, when the market's closed, that's where I'm really doing my research and kind of confirming what I'm seeing on the tape. And if it doesn't confirm, then there's no trade. But, I'm kind of looking at that, going through like a top-down approach and first looking at sectors and seeing if that particular sector is strong. And then I'm going through the sector and looking for individual names that are really showing the relative strength. From there, if I'm confirming then of course it depends on, where that sector lies. But, what I'm always looking for is basically a breakout of either consolidation, or something like we just saw like in Salesforce, for example, where Salesforce spent about a year going sideways and then starts to break out. Those are the things that I really like to see, something that's been quiet for a long time and then all of a sudden gets going and it's got momentum to it. And there you're really looking for, to see how long that breakout can last and try to hold on as long as you can through that breakout.
Are you only trading the long side?
Yeah, I mean, right now with the market trending, I'm mostly trading the long side. If I'm trading I do trade the short side as well, but I'm really quick, right? And that'll change with the market. If things really start to break down, obviously there's some nice opportunity there because things often fall faster than they go up. But I really, consider going back to what I was saying about being a trend trader, if the trend is up right now and I'm seeing really good participation, which we have up until about recently. I mean, the advanced decline line has been breaking out now for a couple months. So it's been confirming that, there's been a little bit of weakness in breadth the last couple days, but until there's really a change, like an overall change, I'll continue to play things to the, to the long side unless we start breaking like 200-day moving averages and that type of thing.
Okay, I want to dig a little bit deeper into your process. So we already discussed how your style of trading, you would consider yourself trend trading momentum. And then you said the process begins with a lot of homework. You mentioned options markets. Uh, Talk to us about that homework. Maybe just give us a recent example of the homework that you're doing and what you're specifically looking for in the options markets when you're doing your homework.
Yeah, great example. I would say, a couple sectors that we've seen break out and consolidate and break out and consolidate. I would say the first one is the semiconductors. That just continues to happen. So, of course, what I'll look at is I'll start with like the SMH ETF or the SOXX ETF, and I'll just kind of confirm what I'm seeing in the trend, which is basically we just continue to kind of roll higher. And we'll come in, we'll come in for a couple of days. There'll be like, either a couple of days or a week of consolidation. And then we'll just take the next leg higher. And then just drilling into the individual names, I want to go in and look at, I think, one of the leaders in that group has been AMD. It just doesn't rest as much as the other names. And then we see call activity, right? We'll continue to see like into some consolidation, and all of a sudden they'll start buying calls again. So it's one of those things where I'm looking for as many things that can kind of confirm what I'm seeing in the technicals when we start to see the institutional buying, and then the last couple months with the semis, it's been, it hasn't just been the AMD or Skyworks or Applied Materials. It's like 5 or 6 different names that, institutions seem like they're juggling and just kind of grasping for. So that's the process of just starting with the overall sector, looking at the, what names are the strongest within the group, and then just reading the tape and seeing where the interest is. So that, I think, of course, forgetting Taiwan Semiconductor, but that's a name too that's been, one of the leaders of the group, and just any type of weakness just sees a lot of accumulation and a chance for institutions to jump back into. A more recent one, the semis have been going on now for months. The more recent one is the home builders. So I'll look at, the ITB ETF. It's actually called Construction ETF, but it's home builders. I think there's about 60% home builders in that ETF. But what I was noticing was that this thing was trying to break out, for a couple weeks. And I was in a trade, this thing just kept on getting to around like the 45, 46 level, just couldn't break out. And then I'll do my homework and I'll start going through the individual names. And it looked like a couple weeks ago, the individual names were just not ready. They just weren't, leaning to the upside. And then just recently, about a week ago, I was going through some charts at night and just breaking apart the group. And, you started to see names like Toll Brothers and DHI and TPH, which is another one that I just recently got long. You started to see them all start to kind of do the same thing. And then, you start to look for those things on the tape, and you'll say, okay, well, they started to buy, Home Depot calls, and they started to buy, a little bit of DHI calls. So that kind of confirms, and I a lot of times I like to be in there too before the call activity. I think sometimes traders don't use call activity, not necessarily, I wouldn't say that they're doing it wrong, but I think the right way to be using option activity sometimes is to try to spot trends before. I think a lot of times it's not rocket science. A lot of the institutions are playing momentum as well. So you get a breakout, and then all of a sudden they're starting to go in and buy, calls. And we saw that in Home Depot. I was going through charts, which I try to do a couple nights a week. And, all of a sudden Home Depot looked like it was trying to push to the upside. Very next day, we see a whole bunch of calls go up. So those are the things that I really I get passionate about. I like to find the groups that are starting to lean and to that breakout, and then this market, we're seeing that, every 5 days, we're basically seeing another group kind of, start to break out, and then they'll break out for a few days, then they'll cool off. Another group will go. So it's been a really fun market to trade the last couple months.
Hey everybody, a quick pause here to talk about Footsie Russell. They are a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. The Russell 2000 Index is a key benchmark for small cap U.S. stocks. Be sure to check out the E-mini Russell 2000 Index futures contract, symbol RTY. For more information on Footsie Russell and their products, please visit footsierussell.com. Several questions I have here.
Sorry,
It's okay.
It was a very long-winded answer.
Well, I'm trying to, I think this is one of the fun things for me to talk to someone who trades ETFs and stocks versus me who trades futures. Like for me, I only trade a couple of markets. So I'm very hyper-focused on really just two markets, S&P, and I trade 10-year Ultra. So I'm not looking at for all of these different other things that you're looking at. So it's always interesting for me to hear as a futures trader what the stock and ETF guys are looking at and how their process is. So I just want to dig a little bit deeper. And it sounds really like your overall strategy is very discretionary to you. I'm sure you have a process, a checklist, let's call it, of things you look at, but you would consider yourself discretionary.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, so discretionary, and you have, it sounds to me like you just have this rhythm of finding groups and these sectors that you're talking about. Are you using any automation for that, or is it just by you just spending a lot of chart time looking at things?
It's a little bit of both, and you mentioned futures trading and looking at the S&P. I mean that's basically where I'll start with. One of the things that I do, either on the weekend or definitely one night during the week, is I'll just kind of look at the overall environment. We'll look at things like I mentioned, the advanced decline line. I want to make sure that if I have that, where I'm that process where I'm looking at individual names and sectors and so forth, I also want to look to see what the overall market is doing. I want to look to, and that's the starting place for me. Looking at either the S&P, Qs, and just kind of see what's going on in the major indices and if they're clearing resistance, if they're bogged down in a range, or if it's breaking support, right? So that's kind of the starting point for me. And then if I think the environment is strong, if I think the environment is good, then I'm going into the sectors and the individual names, and the automation part comes with just basically what I do is just, it's a very methodical process. I'll go through and just put a lot of alerts at where I think are kind of key pivot points. And I'll basically, rather than, which kind of helps me in a sense to not overtrade as much, where I'm just basically waiting until something triggers. And if I know the alert has gone off and the market environment is right, it kind of helps me get into the trade.
Is this how you've always traded, or has your process changed over the years?
Oh, it's definitely changed. I mean, I'm always, tweaking things a little bit. And that's the beauty of trading and investing, is that you never get to a point where you're like, I solved it. It's one of those things that you continuously work on and try to get better at, because from experience, and I'm sure you know this too, you just never get to that point where you're like, oh yeah, this is easy. I figured this out.
No, you don't. Talk to us about some of the indicators that you're using on your charts.
Yeah, sure. So there's one that so I love to kind of get into the nitty gritty. I'm not a programmer. I can't write lines of code. But one of the things that I used to do in my institutional career was I knew what I wanted, and going to the programmers and basically programming algos, fine tuning them and so forth. So I've worked with an individual over the last couple of years, and he started with an indicator, and it's got his name in it. It's called Market Webs. What it basically does is use the volume profile, and it will go ahead and look at like the last period, and then it will draw like a nice range, what we call the value area, and it will basically kind of give you a heads up if something is trading just what we say in value or in a range versus breaking out. So you could use, the beauty of this is it doesn't matter what kind of time frame trader you are. You could be a long-term trader, and you could use this on the weekly chart, and you'll have a value area for the whole year. If you're using the daily chart, you've got a valuary for the month. And then, I'll also use the 1 hour chart too, and you'll have a valuary for the week. So this really helps with just basically spotting breakouts. And if something is trading in a range, I really don't have a need to really trade it unless it's basically just, starting to kind of move from a downtrend to an uptrend, or, kind of recover a little bit from a dip. But for the most part, what I'm looking at is for names to kind of move out of a consolidation area, and I'll do that. And on the 1 hour chart as well as the daily chart for the most part. And when they line up together, then I've really got to trade.
Actually, I have to say that I'm surprised hearing you say that you use a volume profile as a stock and, ETF trader. I can't say that I've heard too many people before that trade stocks talk about using profiles. How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, this has been going on now for a couple of years, and we've been refining an indicator as we go along, as we find more significance with doing it. But, to me, it hits home with, what I used to do as an institutional trader. We just always used to know that certain traders would care at different levels. And that kind of, now how I'm trading now, we'll see that certain levels will come into play, again, and they'll almost act as like gaps sometimes. So it's remarkable, sometimes volume, and again, this will really look at volume, price, and time, and kind of meshes those three together. And we'll just find that there will be a certain level, as a name is either breaking out or is getting back to levels from where it was years ago. It will just have a memory to it, which is pretty, it's fascinating. But, we'll look at a particular level and we'll say, hey, this is a level that I will, take profits at, which again, just really helps in trading once you kind of map your trade out before entry. And we'll see it again and again where there'll be significance at a particular level that was from years ago.
I want to go back to something that you said early in the interview, and I asked you, what markets are you trading? You said, whatever's moving. And, for futures traders, I always actually suggest doing the opposite of this. Pick one or maybe two markets, especially for new traders. I've always felt that I have one or two core markets, and then maybe I'll trade a gold or a crude oil once in a while, a euro. And it's not something that I trade every day, but I have specific reasons why I would go to those markets in specific instances. When you say that you're trading whatever's moving, how are you deciding that? Because you look at the way the market's been for a while now, right? You said trend trading and momentum. Well, that could be a lot of markets. How are you choosing which ones to trade, allocating capital to which markets? Talk to us about how all of that works.
Yeah, and it does require, I think, some familiarity, right? So, it's just one of those things where if you've been trading for a while, you start to kind of learn different groups and how different sectors perform. And I know certain guys who they have, if they're trading like the medical devices, for example, right, which have been trending now for a long time. But I know I have a couple traders in my trading room who just stick to two or three names, and they get to know them really well and know how the market maker is making markets and so forth. And, that adds to their edge. So I think that always helps, like getting to know, certain groups of names or certain names and how they're trading. But, it comes down to sometimes that if those names aren't trending, you have to move on to something else, right? I'm not going, and I see that sometimes with traders like Amazon, for example. Amazon is not moving. Now they're going to have earnings, in a couple weeks, I think. I don't think it's this week. I think it's next week. But Amazon is a name like you could have gotten to know really, really well over the last year, and all of a sudden it dies down. It doesn't have any momentum to it. So, what are you going to do? Keep trading a name that doesn't have momentum, or are you going to, find another group and kind of get to know that group? So that's what I enjoy doing. It's not like I'm just going to jump on to another group. I'm going to learn a little bit about it. Like another example is software stocks went crazy, around the time of, when the trade war heated up. And you start to learn one by one what these little guys do. Some of the smaller players that were in software. So it does take me a little bit of time. If a group just comes out of nowhere and starts outperforming, if I don't catch it and if I don't learn the group right away, I will kind of back off a little bit and learn it a little bit. So there's a little bit of a learning curve sometimes, but I think it just makes sense to really just pay attention and be a little bit objective so that you don't get stuck in a name like Amazon that just has been a relative underperformer, just doesn't have momentum to it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Thank you for explaining that, because I think what you're saying to me, it sounds like you like this specific strategy. So if you're not seeing what you want out of the names and the sectors that you're trading, you are looking for other sectors and other names that fit the criteria that you're looking for, and that's where you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun too. I think it's kind of funny when, for a while value was outperforming growth. And, you saw a lot of people complaining on Twitter. They're like, oh, my growth names, this is a horrible market. And you look over it like, now granted, utilities and consumer staples are not exactly sexy, but hey, if they're going to move too, like if they're going to have the momentum, I'm not bogged down. You don't have to be in investing and trading. You don't have to be hooked into just one group. Whatever is going to take off, you can make money in any of these. Now, again, it does take a little bit of, getting to know the business a little bit and, what they do. And, the more background you have into the group and what's going on, the better. I don't just fly from one group to another. I like to learn a little bit about it, but that's the fun thing, I think, is that being objective and just kind of adapting to what the market gives you, I think is crucial.
Hey everybody, I want to take a quick pause and talk about RJO Futures. They are a long-standing brokerage firm with personal broker relationships to learn, discuss, and trade the futures markets. To learn more about RJO Futures, please visit rjofutures.com. So today is January 22nd as we're recording here. Take us through either a trade that you're currently in or you're currently eyeing from soup to nuts. What the homework would look like, how you go about entering the position, how you would determine a stop, what your risk would be, and then potential targets.
Yeah, sure. So one group that I've been looking at since the beginning of the year, which is a little bit frustrating right now, but that's good. I'd rather show one that's not just, hey, it's worked really well and so forth, but right, because everybody has those. The challenges are the ones, the ones that are interesting are the ones that don't go, perfect, right away. So started really looking at the China internets again this year, a group that I thought was just too hard for most of 2019. And I just said kind of ignoring them for the most part. And I missed probably the first leg that Alibaba, started to make. All of a sudden that name caught momentum. And then we started to see a couple other names within the group like JD.com, Baidu, had a turnaround quarter last time and they've caught some momentum. So that's a group where I've started to recognize that if you look at the relative performance between the Chinese internets and the U.S. internets, and you can use two ETFs for that. One is KWEB, KWEB, and another one is FDN, Frank David Nancy, which is the U.S. Internet ETF, which is basically your FANG stocks. You started to see that there was some relative outperformance between the Chinese internets are starting to outperform. Now, of course, part of this is because of the trade deal and basically just no new tariffs, which I think is most important. But you really started to see them start to outperform, and they've got I don't want to say an open field to run, but if there's going to be more momentum in this market, I think it's a great place to be. So yeah, I'll start with that Chinese internet ETF, KWEB, and then I'll start breaking it apart and just looking for names that look most attractive technically. So a name that I got into, so I have been in and out of this ETF depending, long-term account versus short-term, and that's a big thing. Like if I think that the trend, like if I'm looking at a weekly chart, then I'm not going to be trading, short-term options, right? I'm basically in the stock. So that's something that I've been in. I recognize the level right around 54, which was, one of these pivot points using my indicator. So I did take profits in my one account, my shorter term account that I was holding this in. And then I said, okay, well, let's see if this thing kind of comes in a little bit. And you have the opportunity now this week because we're hearing about the coronavirus, which, right away headlines are coming out about this. And of course you have a knee-jerk reaction where Chinese equities are selling off on it. So this, I think, is a better entry point for some names. So if you look at a name like JD.com, which is one name that I bought yesterday, I was looking for an entry into this, but it was a little bit extended. Then what I'll do is I'll look for names within the group that start to outperform versus the other. JD was one name yesterday where I said, hey, I'm going to take a shot at one of these. This name's been showing some nice relative strength. If you look to see how it closed yesterday, it actually closed a nice green bar yesterday, and the thing's up 3.9% today. So, it's really bucking the trend. I think the overall group is only up about 1%. I'll start with the overall trend in the group, which I think is positive. I think it's showing some signs of something that it hasn't done before in the last year, which is relative outperformance. And then I'll try to find my winners within the group and what's acting a little bit different. So JD is a name that I just went in stock. I didn't go into options, and it looks pretty good. And I see a lot of things with this group. It's kind of a catch-up trade through some of the other areas, obviously in the U.S. that have just, really done very well. And then I'll try to map it out. So what I'm looking at, so I've got the charts up right now. I'm looking for this thing for JD.com to possibly go up to 46. So I think it's important, which we haven't really touched upon too much, but just making sure you're defining where your stop price is, where you want to be taking profits, doing all that in the beginning of the trade.
Well, how do you define where a stop would be? Let's just use this trade in particular. And then are you also using the same indicator, the profiles that we discussed, for helping you with potential targets?
Absolutely, yeah. So the beginning of the trade, I used so JD right now is trading at 41.60. I was using a stop price of $38, which is basically the stock has run up, consolidated a little bit, so it's putting in like a bull flag. Now, of course, where I would be wrong is if it breaks down and it doesn't fulfill that bull flag and it actually breaks south rather than north. So, I'm putting my stop at an area where it would be confirmed that, hey, it's not a bull flag. So that's my stop. And then I've got targets, which are basically extensions away from this month's value area going north. And that's where I get the 44 level.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Last question before we get into rapid fire.
Cool.
We talk a lot today about your process, how you're discretionary, and something I brought up on social media and on the show several times is I believe that there are two types of edges, mental and statistical. It's great to have both. You definitely need to have a combo of both, but you really got to have a really strong edge in one of them, I think, in order to be successful in trading. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have. I think you have to have a little bit of both. I think you really have to be involved, and you really have to love what you do, and you have to have some type of edge, something that you're doing a little bit better than anybody else, or something that's very good. So for me, it's being able to kind of find something that's different and starting to break out, and being objective through that process and finding some relative strength. But I think it also really just comes down to the process, because you could do all those things and you could do all those things correctly. But if you don't have a well-defined process around it, and if you're not disciplined, because just because I had the idea, I get a lot of ideas that they don't work too. So you have to be able to fall back on the process and discipline. And there's little things that I do to kind of trick myself, right? So if you get comfortable with your process, you could kind of tell yourself, hey, well, your process is stronger than any individual pick that you made. Stick to your process and be patient, and you'll get the next one. But at the end of the day, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. I would much rather do what everybody tries to say and let the winners run and cut the losers. But the quicker that you can cut the losers and not be static, not get bogged down in a name that's not working out for you just because it was your idea, you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, I agree a lot of what you just said. And I do think you need a combination of both for sure. And I go back to myself because that's all I can really speak of. And for me, I've always felt that my edge is mental edge, because if I were to just take my strategy and trade every single signal the exact same over time, I'd probably be at a scratch or a loser. And how I've made money over the years is just by self-awareness, and understanding my strategy, execution of my strategy. For me, I've made a majority of the money trading my strategy in very short times, to where I know everything is working really well, so I take full advantage of it. So I'm increasing sizes at different times, and when things aren't going well and I recognize scenarios and situations that the strategy doesn't work so well, I might just not trade those. And sometimes it burns me because they end up, working really well. You can't be perfect, but I've always leaned on my mental edge versus statistical, because I just never had something that was so great statistically, because if I did, I would have just automated it. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And it was very interesting hearing you share your thoughts on it, because a lot of what you do is discretionary. So for you, I mean, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it seems to me as though you really have a very strong mental edge to be able to be discretionary.
Yeah, and it just comes with it's things that you've developed over time that have kind of get you around like some of your psychological, stupid things that you may do, right?
Yep.
So the more that you can kind of plan things out a little bit, so that you're not off guard. We haven't really got into, which I think is outside of this, of this call, but position sizing and so forth. I mean, everybody's going to have losers and things that don't work out. You just have to really be careful that you are making sure that you're sizing your trades appropriately. I mean, I just had one that didn't go right for me, basically the last 2 days, and you get to the point where it's like, it's it happened,
yeah.
And that's another thing is you'll never be able to like get all the information that's out there, right? There's always going to be something that you're either A, not going to see, or B, it's a headline that's kind of out of your control. So, it's part of the game. And, the more that you can kind of get over that, and the idea that basically you are going to have ones that are not going to work out, the quicker that you can kind of move on to the next best idea.
Yeah. Great conversation so far. We're not done yet, Christian. I have rapid fire questions next if you're ready for those.
Rapid fire questions. Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, everybody. Our rapid fire segment is sponsored by Trading Technologies. Trade the global markets with TT. They are the world's fastest commercially available futures trading platform. Now with integrated tools for advanced options trading, cryptocurrencies, and trade surveillance. You can try it now for free at tryttnow.com. Christian, first question for you. What traders influenced your life the most and why?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a popular choice that you probably hear a lot, but I'm going to go with Stanley Druckenmiller. There's a couple things that I really like about him. The fact that he's got great instincts, but he's got the process behind him too. I think he's a pretty from when I listen to him, it sounds like he's a very disciplined trader. And the other thing about him that you don't hear too many people talk about is he's humble. You just don't hear him brag. He's always I think he recognizes that this game is very difficult, and he's never one of those guys to be like, oh yeah, I nailed it. So I admire him a lot.
What was one of the hardest things for you to overcome in trading?
I think stubbornness. Stubbornness comes from probably my whole family. So, that's one of those things, your weaknesses, you want to be able to recognize quickly and, do things to kind of trick your mind. We mentioned before about, having confidence in your overall process and then in any individual one pick. I think that helps me out a lot.
How has your trading process evolved over the years?
Adding more rules, knowing yourself, knowing what you're strong at, knowing what you're not good at, and then playing to your strengths.
What is one attribute that you believe every trader should have?
Process and good instincts. A couple of things we already talked about. Having that process and being able to fall back on that is important.
Favorite book about trading?
I've got two in here, but they're kind of one and the same. I like The Turtle Traders, very easy to read, great story, and I also like Trend Trading.
If you had to pick a profession other than trading, what would it be?
So I'm going to go with the fantasy profession because you didn't define that in the question. So I'm going to go with football coordinator, very much involved in sports.
What's the best piece of advice you received about trading?
Don't fight the Fed and don't fight the trends.
If you can go back in time and give the younger you a piece of advice about trading, what would it be?
I would say to learn to write early, as well as public speaking. I think if a lot of people who go into technical backgrounds, they think that they may not need to know these things, but they do come up in your life. You do know how to need to write as well as to public speak.
If you had an elevator pitch me your edge in trading, what would you say?
Being able to find the trend in groups of stocks, stick with them, and using the market webs, the indicator that I discussed, to help me execute my plan.
Last question for today. Favorite thing to do when you're not trading?
Skiing. I love to ski. It provides a great break away from the screens, really clears your head, and gets you outside, which is important.
Yeah, I love being in the mountains. Not a skier anymore. Last time I went, I wiped out. That was it. Too scared of injury now. I golf. Where can people find you on Twitter, and give us a website to check out?
Yeah, sure. So Twitter handle is my first initial and last name, so at Fromhertz, and I'm at TribecaTradeGroup.com.
Tell everybody a little bit about Tribeca Trade Group and what they'll learn when they go to your website.
Yeah, sure. So I run an all-day trading room, and what I try to do is just, provide a lot of insight into, how I'm trading. Everybody can see what I'm trading and just the thoughts that go on in my mind. And from someone who's been trading institutionally for a number of years and now has kind of brought that to retail traders and makes a living at trading.
Great conversation today, Christian. Thank you so much for taking me into your world of trading stocks and ETFs. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for coming on Futures Radio Show today.
Thanks so much, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Futures Radio Show. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on iTunes. You can listen to all of our episodes on futuresradioshow.com, iTunes, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher.